I'm glad to welcome Madam Antonopoulou, who is the Greek Minister of Labour, Social Security and Social Solidarity. And we took the decision in this room, I believe it was, to invite you here to our committee, since we are deeply engaged in the situation in Greece. And we are also warmly welcoming Mr. Schmit, Nicolas Schmit, the Luxembourg Minister for Labour, Employment and Social and Solidarity Economy. We met him several times during the Luxembourg presidency, and we welcome you once again back to our committee. Having said that, I will now give the floor to you, Madam Antonopoulou. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to thank the Employment Committee for the very kind invitation to discuss with you issues of concern, not only of my country, not only for Greece, but what I believe is an issue for... Is there a problem?
No.
What I believe is an issue of great concern for all of us. A few words first on the situation on unemployment in Greece in recent years. At the beginning of the crisis, there were 375,000 persons that were unemployed. And through the crisis and the measures, austerity measures that were adopted in our country, the unemployment exploded to 1,370,000 persons. We went from 7.5 unemployment rate to 27.5 unemployment. In recent times, a mixture of policies our government has introduced has managed to put a brake in this type of disaster, social disaster and economic disaster, that had hit the population and small and medium-sized enterprises in Greece. The results, because I do not want to take up too much of our time with figures, the result is that unemployment has come down from 26.5% to 27% that was in 2014 to 21.7%. And this reduction took in an environment where policies were not allowed to move the country fast as it was needed towards growth and recovery. Youth unemployment has been reduced by 10 percentage points. Brain drain has been reduced in the last 2.5 years. And we feel confident that using both a mixture of government policies and specifically employment policies and the support that we receive from the European Social Fund has yielded results. We needed to implement fairly quickly a number of changes in the programming and delivery of active labour market policies. The main problem in Greece of joblessness is that there are no job offers. There is need for skilling and retraining, but that had to be done in a very targeted way so that we do not waste resources and we do not use ESF funding as an income support policy. It is an employment promotion policy that we should all be geared towards. In this respect, we have excellent results. We have developed a diagnostic mechanism for the first time in Greece of labour market needs in cooperation with social partners and the private sector. We identify those jobs and those skills that are truly needed, and therefore we have a success rate of 35%, meaning when people graduate out of these training programs, 35% of them can find a job, and that is above the European average. But given that the difficulty that we have in Greece is that the private sector, no matter how well we train and no matter how much we support them through wage subsidies, cannot create jobs at will, we also implemented an innovative public works plus at the community level where people are hired among those that are the most difficult to place, that is, those that are over 50 years old, those that have been out of the labour market for 3 years, 4 years, those households that do not have even one adult in employment status, so that they can find a job. It's a temporary job for 8 months, but at the same time, they deliver those services and those improvements in small type of infrastructure that has a very clear and very measurable, clearly measurable impact on local communities as to avoid clientelism and as to avoid all kinds of unsavory practices that one could imagine in such situations. Having said this, the problem that several of our countries face is that they experience unemployment rates that are way above today the European average. There are 5 countries that have unemployment rates over 9.5% to 10%. In other countries, we have not a problem with overall unemployment, but unemployment among youth, very high rates of unemployment. In yet other countries, we have the problem of long-term unemployment, where for a particular cohort, finding a job is impossible. Among them, looking at our collective experience, those that are older workers and have stayed outside the labour market for over a year face tremendous difficulties in finding a job. The problem that we face is on 2 fronts. One has to do with the general package of economic policy, macroeconomic policy that we implement, which does not allow for countries to create enough jobs. Jobs cannot be created out of thin air. It is the private sector that creates them. It is the part of the economy that works under the social economy principles, and it is the public sector, according to the needs that the public sector has. If we implement macroeconomic policies that do not allow for growth, we will not have job creation. On the other hand, when we think about the interventions in support of creating employment for the unemployed, what we commonly refer to as active labour market policies, several countries do not have sufficient fiscal space to be able to address the problems that particular segments of the population or the overall population may be facing. It is in this regard that we began a conversation first with the Minister of Luxembourg some time ago, about a year ago, and following that with the ministers of labour in Spain, in Portugal, in Slovenia, in Italy, in France, where we all recognized that we face a common problem. We all recognized the intersection between economic policy and social policy in support of the unemployed. And what we are here today to present to you is a proposal for your consideration, for discussion, so that we can figure out ways of improving on it and we can move forward with it. The suggestion is the following. Given the Growth and Stability Pact and the flexibility that must and is possible to be provided within that context, countries that face unemployment rates, long-term unemployment rates among the older generation of workers or the very young, be allowed to spend and invest on the workforce that extra amount that is needed by first identifying the extra resources, and there are such options that I will mention one, but most importantly, for many countries that have difficulties with unemployment, let's not forget, unemployment is the expression, it is the manifestation of the economic difficulties that we face or of specific problems cohorts of workers may be facing for a variety of reasons. In those circumstances, even if a country were to have the ability to spend an extra 0.5%, an extra 1% of GDP in supporting the labour force, we would not be able actually to spend that amount because of the targets that we have in the Growth and Fiscal Stability Pact. We would be overspending, and therefore, in the calculation of the primary deficit that some countries are allowed to have, up to 3%, up to 2.5%, or in countries such as Greece, where we have the obligation to produce every year a primary surplus, if we were to calculate these extra funds, even €1 spent will be affecting the target, and we will not be able to meet that target. Therefore, there needs to be some space created where we begin considering this type of government spending as an investment, because it is an investment on human capital. It is an investment on the workforce. It is an investment that is good for society, but also positive for the economy. When we are able to provide this extra funding received by the unemployed, that participate in a variety of interventions, active labour market policies, is spent back in the economy, is spent back in their communities. When their consumption level increases, while they are producing and they are allowed not to be excluded from producing and contributing to society, at the same time, they generate that impetus in the economy at the local level to create in and of themselves new jobs. Therefore, the issue for us is dual on two fronts. One, how can we think creatively and collectively in order to be able to allocate the additional resources needed for some countries without pushing these countries to violate the targets that have been set in terms of the deficit targets annually, and the second, for countries that do not have the ability to find the resources from within their own economy, what tools can we use, what instruments can we avail these countries with in order to have these resources. And I would like to end with two suggestions. On average, in Europe, we spend 0.5% of GDP in support of active labour market policies for all countries that have, on average, 9.5 to 10% of unemployment. It would be only fair if a country has 20% unemployment, that 0.5% of GDP increases proportionately to 1% of GDP. If you have double the unemployment rate, if you have 1.5 times the unemployment rate, that these countries are allowed to spend and invest on their workforce that is idle, a segment of it remains idle for no fault of their own, for no fault of the employees, the ex-employees and workers, to be able to spend the additional resources. Secondly, that this will not be calculated, as I mentioned earlier, as an added expenditure, but will be treated as an investment in the future of the country, in the youth that cannot find the job, in those workers that have contributed and cannot find the job, and therefore will not be part of the calculation of the primary surplus or primary deficit. This is the first type of thinking that we have to engage in. The second is, where will the resources come from? And the suggestion is, given President Juncker's commitment to use a part of what we all refer to as the Juncker Plan for social investment purposes, that a certain amount is leveraged. It has been put forward as a proposal that 5% of the total package is allocated to those countries that face severe difficulties with unemployment issues, and that it is spent in order to invest in the labor force and its readiness when growth of jobs does take place, that they are ready to take on these new jobs. There can be alternative suggestions. The suggestion for a European fund for unemployment has been there. The suggestion that the spending out of the European budget must increase for this type of social interventions that are in reality economic interventions. They are not only social interventions, they have an economic positive impact on households but also in communities and the businesses of those communities, that it increases. With this in mind, I would like, with these two issues in mind, I look forward to a constructive discussion as to how we can move forward. It could be a first step that this committee decides to issue a public statement, that decides to come up with a suggestion for a resolution to be adopted in the future, that some improvements on the proposal can be incorporated, that we find means and ways to create a social dialogue around the issue and to engage in our own countries and as a European community with the ministers of finance. I am looking forward to your recommendations, your views and suggestions, and I thank you very much once again for listening to me and giving me the opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you very much. We don't have all the time we wish we had, but I'll give the floor for a short intervention from Mr. Schmit.
Yes, thank you very much. First, it's a great pleasure to be here again. And I'm very glad to be associated with this initiative. We had the opportunity to talk a lot about it. And I think though we are very pleased that the situation of employment in the European Union is improving, certainly this does not reflect the whole image and the whole reality, because youth unemployment, long-term unemployment remains relatively high all over the European Union. There are 3.5 million young people still out of job in the European Union. And this situation remains dramatic in several countries, especially those who have been mostly affected by the economic and financial crisis. If there are close to 50% of young people out of job, this is not something we can easily accept as Europeans. So I think we have to look for original, new ideas and more effective measures to combat this high youth and long-term. And very often young people are also long-term unemployed. And this is the biggest drama, because their chances to find a job in the future lower from day to day. I'm also very sensitive to this initiative because 2 years ago, when I had the chance to be the president of this council, of the EBSCO Council, I had launched a discussion on what I called Youth Guarantee or Youth Employment Initiative and beyond. And my beyond was very clearly job creation. Because we notice all, and it has been stated, that training, even structural reforms on the labor market, better public employment services, they are very important and they can contribute to improve the employment situation, but especially when this unemployment rate is so high as we experience it in different countries, they do not change basically the situation. And we will be then in a long-term, very long-term situation, a very high unemployment, and especially affecting the young people and the older elderly people who won't find a job. Therefore, I think it's important to think out of the box. And allow me just to mention one expert in employment policy, Mr. Weiser. Mr. Weiser, he was a few months ago still the head of the German Public Employment Service. And before leaving his job, he said, well, in Germany, where the employment situation is very favorable, very positive, nevertheless, there is a problem with long-term unemployed. And he said, we can invest millions and billions on these people by training and so on. They won't find a job anymore on the normal labor market. And economic theory teaches us that the longer you are unemployed, the more difficult it will become to find a job. This is the famous Blanchard theory, and I think it has been proven in the reality. And what he says is, well, we have to create jobs for these persons. We cannot just leave them outside of the system. And by the way, it's more costly, socially, economically, but also financially, not to employ them than to create jobs for them and to give them a new perspective. And therefore, I think at a moment where we are talking a lot about the social pillar, at a moment where we have to reflect on reforming the euro area, and by the way, the unemployment rates are higher in the euro area than in the other countries, just as a mentioning by the way, we have to integrate this dimension of fighting unemployment of the young and of the long-term unemployed. And therefore, I think that job creation has to be in the center. Youth guarantee, yes, a good approach, a good measure, but with youth guarantee alone, I open a bracket, youth guarantee needs also some stronger funding, by the way, which has not been, I think, assured in that context. But youth guarantee alone does not allow young people automatically to find a job. Therefore, job creation is at the center. Now, social pillar, we have to link that with this issue of job creation, and especially when we talk about reforming the economic governance of the Eurozone, this has to be in the center of our preoccupation, of our reform efforts. And there is the idea of a fiscal capacity, and I think Maria Rodriguez will come to that, which could be also a contribution to that. But flexibility in the Stability and Growth Pact is certainly the right approach, because by hindering the countries who are most affected by unemployment, and especially youth and long-term unemployment, by hindering them to invest more in job creation, we are not improving their situation, not even their fiscal situation. We are deteriorating their fiscal situation because we are building up barriers for growth. And the only way at the end will be economic recovery and growth, also to be mastering, to be able to master the debt issue in these countries. So I think flexibility in these instruments is absolutely necessary. And this was a debate here in the Parliament when the different instruments were adopted. There were requests to introduce greater flexibility, especially in relation to growth policies and investment policies in all the countries, not only in those who are not in adjustment processes, but especially also in those countries, because this flexibility is mostly needed in those who are mostly affected by low growth and by high unemployment. My last word is just, you have said brain drain has lowered, and this is positive for all the countries who have a high level of youth unemployment. Because sometimes I hear people saying, well, there's no problem because all these young people, they just can move around. There is a need for young people all over Europe because there is some. But this means if all the nice, well-trained, which means high investments on these well-trained young people in the most affected countries, move around, go away, who will at the end pay the debt? Who will pay it? The pensioners or the less productive? So there is a need also to keep these young productive people in the countries. Mobility certainly can contribute to cushion a bit the problem, but it's not a solution to the problem. So we have really to think further on that. And therefore I think the ideas which have been put forward by my Greek colleague really need support, have to be precised. We have to create a strict and good framework for doing it. But I think there is now urgency to show that Europe, in this new phase we are in now, and I think this is a positive phase, is also now tackling the youth unemployment problem and the long-term unemployment problem in all the countries, and specifically in those who need it most. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for those introductions. We are, as always, running out of time. I have 3 names on my list now. I want those who are not... okay. I have Pirinski, Kuneva, Rodriguez, Jongerius, and I don't know, Fontoulis, and Regner, yes. Gabi, yeah. I don't have all the names.
Okay, start with Armas, please.
And we'll take.
Start with Armas,
yeah. Okay, we'll start with Agnes Jongerius, who was first. I had noted that. Please be as short as possible, because now we have a long list of those who want to intervene. Please, Agnes.
Okay, I will be short, but I really want to express my gratitude for the Greek minister to come up with this proposal, and not only coming up with a proposal, but going around Europe trying to get support, and also now trying to get support from the European Parliament, because I think indeed it's true, unemployment, youth unemployment, although perhaps not an issue in general in the European Union anymore, but with very big pockets of unemployment, is really an issue we should try to solve in a debate. Before, my colleague Perinsky noted the growing inequalities and the effect this has on the economic and social developments in Europe if we don't find solutions and be able to really do something about this inequality in Europe and in the different member states. And my question would be perhaps, so we all know we are waiting for the German elections. It's a little bit the elephant in the room, but so let's say we have these elections and then we know who will be in the lead for future European developments. So I think you could say we need to have concrete proposals, let's say, in October, because then I think the show will really be moving. And I'd like to use your brain power to see how best from this committee we could work on something which will be timely, so not a long resolution which will be finished in February, because I think then the window of opportunity is perhaps gone. Minister Schmit pointed in the direction of the social pillar and the euro reform. I think perhaps if it's on job creation, there is also this reflection paper on globalization and what that has done for winners and losers in Europe. Perhaps we could also work from there, because there are no concrete proposals yet from the European Commission what to do after this reflection paper in this issue. So perhaps we could use our time to see how we can do something effectively concrete which can be tabled when the big wheeling and dealing will be done.
Thank you. Madam Zimmer.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Thank you. I'm very happy that we have you both in the committee here today, and to note that amongst the ministers responsible in some of the EU member states at least, there is cooperation going on and a visibility that within the EU and the Eurozone we have the need to take urgent action. We have to recognise that there are some countries which cannot keep up with labour market developments and are under severe social pressure. We can talk about a social emergency, and the general conditions in the Eurozone right now aren't geared up to reacting to that development. That's why I think the proposal is a very helpful one. You talked about 3.5 million young people without a job at present in Greece. There continues to be a high percentage. You talked about 45%. Even if the figures have gone down, we cannot accept this. I think it's a useful proposal in particular because there is a suggestion that on the one hand the spending which is required for an activating of labour market policy should be kept out of the debt calculations, and we need flexibility within the Stability and Growth Pact. But also you've got a reference to EFSI, and saying with regard to EFSI we should say that the idea that the minimum of 5% of EFSI should be spent on social issues should actually be delivered. It's something that was offered and now it should be delivered. I just want to make a comparison. In the 1990s in Eastern Germany, we had a massive collapse of industry and society, and hundreds of thousands of jobs were lost in a very short span of time. And without an active labour market policy, many more people from the eastern region of Germany would have migrated to the western region of Germany. And I think there's an opportunity to spend money tangibly on people, supporting small businesses, supporting them so that they can employ and train people. This can't be a solution adopted across the board, but it's a way of buying time to save people from a depression and give them a future. I'd be in favour if we, as a committee, could take an active role, if we could carefully examine the proposals and support them. I'm very much in favour of a statement that will do that. And also, with regard to what the colleague just said, we are waiting for the election results in Germany, but we shouldn't wait for what government we have. We should say that whatever happens, we're going to have a new EU government here, and it should remember its own history, namely the 1990s, and the need to spend money on supporting people properly. And we should drop this tunnel vision, which means that the Eurozone has been impeded rather than making progress. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Weber.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to thank very much the two ministers for their presentation. Very interesting, very important. And I have three very concrete questions, especially but not only for Minister Antonopoulos. You said that in Greece you reduced the unemployment by 5–6% in a couple of years. And my question is, how did you do this? Was it through investment, governmental investment, foreign investment, Greek capital? I'd like to know if possible. Then you mentioned that idea of the diagnostic of what the economy needs and the training very business oriented for what the market requires. And again, my question here is, was it entirely done with governmental funds, or was it also with the contribution from the business sector for this retraining of the workers? And regarding, of course, your idea of flexibility of the fiscal pact, I think that here probably the issue that would be most debated would be if this additional percentage would be used to raise salaries or minimum income or something, or for something concrete. You mentioned, Minister Schmit, several times job creation. And again, I'd like to understand how do you see this, let's say, support for the job creation in more concrete terms? What kind of assistance through this flexibility of the pact? Thank you.
Laura Aggia, please, the floor is yours.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the ministers who have given us an overview. I'm not sure how far it reflects reality, because you were talking about an increase in youth employment in terms of employment. I think we are forgetting to count those who are still inactive, or those in my country who feel that they've got no further opportunities. Calculating in the inactive changes the figures dramatically. I'm talking of my experience in the last year in Italy, 130,000 young people. I think these figures need to be brought to light. people who've given up looking for a job, who feel they've no prospect of getting a job, who are not studying, who aren't even registered with job centres, who have just decided to capitulate. So with regard to employment, I think we need to consider that. Of course, we need to work on employment in Greece, but we need to create the jobs. I think incentives for businesses may be a solution, but businesses need to be able to take on staff. How do we do that? How can we support businesses? Where do we decide to invest? And how much do we invest and what? I think we all need to see significant liquidity here. We need to understand that 6 years of austerity haven't healed a terminal disease, and even if Greece rises again like a phoenix, I'm not sure that with the turn the economy has taken we'll be able to see such a rebirth. I think 6 years of social slaughter have been enough to throw us off our track. 8 billion euros were recently granted to Greece, and a great song and dance was made about that. But the 8 billion euros which have been given to Greece as a loan, in terms of your social policy, how much are you going to invest of those 8 billion on active social policy? How many children have been guaranteed their meals? How many people have seen their public health spending guaranteed from the 8 billion you've received? I believe no one has received those guarantees. I know that the money is just being spent not on alms giving but on paying off debt or servicing debt. And we've seen people's situations sold off. What kind of collateral or guarantees have you had to put up for that money coming in simply to stem the social carnage in your country? I'm not criticising you. I'm an Italian and I'm very familiar with the situation you're living through. Mr. Schmit, I think, was in Greece a couple of years ago. There's been so many promises and discussions with stakeholders, but what really has changed since 2 years ago in Athens? Nothing. Nothing's changed in my country. I'm from Umbria. After a year, people from my homeland and from the Marche region and the Lazio region are still living in cars, not even in container accommodation after the earthquakes there. You can't make something from nothing. And if we don't learn that you have to spend money on the basic needs of our citizens, then I don't think in a year and a half in Athens or in Italy we're going to see anything changing, because nothing is changing. Thank you.
Clearly they deserve every possible support. I would pose 3 small brief issues. One, I think that it is worthwhile looking at these proposals in the context of the basic treaties of the Union. Article 3 of the Treaty of the Union, which says that it will be promoting a social market economy, promoting full employment. Now, the Stability and Growth Pact cannot ignore this basic commitment of the Union. And your 2 proposals for flexibility in the pact and for additional social investments of the EFSI should be seen as first steps to implement this basic norm, not as a kind of, excuses, but we want a little more flexibility. Nothing of the sort. It is a must, this flexibility, in order to treaty to be respected. Number two, I would like to know if you have any ideas about the role of collective bargaining in achieving better employment and a better functioning labor market. Clearly, this was one of the crucial issues in your travails with the Troika, but I feel that if we are talking about successful social models in Europe, the one in Germany, let's say, post-war reconstruction was founded on a very strong social partnership. So why is now Greece and the other countries approached in a totally opposite way? And thirdly, I believe that very much it is useful for this committee to come out with a statement in support and build our discussion in the context of the discussions on the white paper. On the 24th of September, we will be expecting President Juncker to give his evaluation of what is the best of all those scenarios. This is 3 days after the event, I believe, that Madam Jungerius was referring to in Germany, and there should be a very clear message to the President personally that he cannot stay at the level of what the Commission is proposing for the social pillar. Nice wording of rephrased principles. There has to be real action on the items you have mentioned, on flexibility in the pact, on additional resources for social investment, as first steps to address this very crucial challenge before the Union today. Thank you. Less than 3 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Kuneva, the floor is yours.
Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ, Πρόεδρε. Θέλω να ευχαριστήσω την αναπληρώτη Υπουργό.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Minister, for joining us today. Thank you for your proposals. I'd also like to thank Mr. Schmit from Luxembourg. Thank you for coming. Thank you for letting us know about these issues. I hope the Member States and Commission will support your proposals. We need to exclude employment spending from the Stability and Growth Pact. It shouldn't be regarded as part of the deficit. The problem for Greece and other countries at the moment is youth unemployment and long-term unemployment above the Eurozone average, and that poses a risk for the Eurozone as a whole, despite the growth which is emerging in certain countries. We're not saying this, it's the ECB that's saying it. A few months ago, it presented a study on unemployment in the Eurozone, showing that the percentage of labour which is not being used because of excessive long-term unemployment and because of being shut into part-time employment is at a level over 18%, so twice as much as normal unemployment. It becomes chronic with time in the labour market, and that entails very adverse consequences for Eurozone growth. And I think the proposal put before us today deserves our support, the support of the whole committee for that reason, and in particular also for those countries that don't believe it affects them because they don't have so much unemployment, but perhaps they don't have very high quality employment. Not much point boasting about very low deficits when we have so many thousands of young people without jobs and without the opportunity to make the most of their abilities. Thank you.
Thank you. Maria João Rodrigues, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. And we should really be grateful to both of ministers to come to join us, putting the focus again on this central problem. Something is basically wrong on the way the European Union is still working, because we do have divergences between member states when it comes unemployment rate, creating jobs, investing in people. Of course, some can argue there are some mistakes of national policies, and perhaps we can also recognize this, but we also need to recognize that a major part of the problem has to do on the way the European Union, and particularly the Eurozone, is still working. And we need to correct this. We cannot accept to have a kind of machinery for social divergences and economic divergence. We need to stop this. First of all, we need to create conditions for all member states to create jobs and invest at a similar pace. This is not at all the case yet. For this, we need to redirect economic policy. But the second part is that we need to have similar conditions for member states to invest in people. And with that, I will address the two proposals made by the Minister Antonopoulou. Because, let me tell you, first of all, yes, you are right when you say that member states who need to invest in people and who are still dealing with brain drain, so a bit loss of human capital, they should have the conditions to develop social investments in active labour market policies, education and training, and they are limited by their fiscal space. Yes, you are right, it is criticism. You should know that we have been involved in this discussion for a long period. In 2014 and 15, we achieved something which was to introduce a little bit margin of flexibility in the Stability and Growth Pact for countries to invest, but only when these countries are no longer in excessive deficit procedure. This was the small margin we have included. Of course, this is not enough to address the situations we have in some member states, including Greece. From my viewpoint, the first step to solve this problem is to recognize that this expenditure is investment. It's social investment. And we are not there yet, both in Parliament and in the Council. Once we recognize this as an investment, we should say that member states investing in people in the right direction, yes, they should have more time to consolidate their public finances. I'm not saying excluding, I'm just saying giving them more time. This is one part of the solution. Nevertheless, the gap is so big that I believe that national budgets need to be complemented with European instruments. And this must be the role for cohesion funds. That's why the upcoming discussion on MFF is so important. This should be indeed the role for the Juncker Plan for investment in the next phase, to pay more attention to countries in difficulties, to invest in people. And finally, when it comes to the Eurozone, this should be one of the purposes of a fiscal capacity for the Eurozone. So I believe that we need to move in this direction. And my final proposal is that we in the Parliament and you in the Council, we need to organize a proper dialogue with our colleagues who are in charge of finance, public finance and economic policy. Without these, there is no real solution. I can tell you that we have a method to work with our colleagues in Economic Committee. Some of them are members of this committee. This is my case, but we have a method for this. And my plea for you is that we also organize this interaction with your colleagues in ECOFIN. I believe that statements can be useful, but in practical terms, for me, the European semester with the next annual growth survey should put this challenge at the center. We need to finish up with these divergences in Europe. Without this, there is no real future for the European Union. And my proposal would be that we consider finishing with divergences and restarting with convergence as the central goal for the European semester in the next cycle. This means already starting in September, October. So this is for now. Thank you.
We are running out of time. I hope that the translators will stay so that the three last questions can be put to the ministers, and then that the ministers can have a short wrap-up of this meeting. I'll give the floor to Madame Mellin, please.
Oui, merci Madame la Présidente. Merci au ministre qui a voulu.
Thank you to the two ministers. I think it was a remarkable and paradoxical thing to see side by side a minister from a country which in good faith fell victim to globalization and the role of the rating agencies, and then bore the full brunt of Europe's imposition of an austerity plan on it, whilst propping up the banks, which hadn't exactly been models of austerity themselves. And then, alongside that minister, a minister from a country whose per capita income is among the highest in Europe, and also with very low levels of unemployment. And really, I think we've got to do what the founding fathers of Europe would have wanted, and to drop the Stability and Growth Pact, which has never been a growth pact, whatever says, and also at the same time we've got free movement of people. Really, what's happened is the brain drain has happened, and unemployment has shifted from one country to another. I think we have to recognise that the Eurozone has 2 points more unemployment than the other countries of Europe. The other question I wanted to know about is whether you would follow us in saying that we need to deal with the causes, not the effects, and give member states their national sovereignty back, in particular over their currency, and full control of social and employment measures to free themselves from the Stability and Growth Pact, to allow themselves to have growth. I think what we've heard about growth is just wishful thinking, pie in the sky. We need to create a new relationship in Europe between free countries with bilateral, multilateral work, allowing them the national latitude they need. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Papadimoulis.
Ευχαριστώ. Θα είμαι εξαιρετικά σύντομος. Θέλω να ευχαριστήσω την κυρία Αντονοπούλου, τον κύριο Σμιτ.
I'll be brief. I'd like to thank Mrs. Antonopoulou and Mr. Schmit for the proposals they've made and for being here in the Employment Committee. I would suggest the following. The Employment Committee and the Economic Affairs Committee of the European Parliament should follow up, should provide a follow-up to this indispensable dialogue between the ministers, the Council, the European Parliament and the Commission, to ensure that these valid proposals actually manage slowly but surely to happen. And we hope that in the Commission and in the Council and the Parliament will all be able to agree.
And Mr. Fontoulis, the last speaker.
I too would thank the ministers for coming to our committee to inform us about these very important points. However, Madam Minister, Mrs. Antonopoulou, I would say that you had a lot of pipe dreams or wishes that you hoped might happen when it comes to the ministers and employment, and you want to reduce unemployment, but how? With flexible work arrangements? or reduced rights to unemployment benefit, or are you going to actually change things, or are you going to redistribute poverty? We don't know what kind of employment has now become the rule in Greece. Workers are dismissed and they're rehired with hourly contracts, and they can't manage to make a decent living off of what they're paid. Everything is being cut. Even the Social Security funds are down. And there's the tax burden on companies leading them to shut down with massive dismissals as a result. Is it true or not? But I heard that there were 100,000 euros in profit in a company, but was taxed 110,000 euros. Such a company either stops operations or else falls into the parallel economy. That's not the way we create jobs or a stable environment where investments will follow, because investments are what are called for to create jobs. If we want a real policy, we want to be able to do it without choking the companies and the citizens. Otherwise, all these targets of long-term employment will just be a pipe dream. And maybe you can gain some time politically at the expense of our country.
Well, all these questions, I'm not sure that you will be able to answer all of them, but there are concrete proposals too, and as you can hear, there is an intense and deep engagement in the Greek situation and in the European situation in this committee. And of course, just to answer Mr. Papadimoulis' question, of course we will follow up. We have done so every time we have had invited discussions on the Greek issue, and we always follow up and try to change the European Union and change the world. And now I give the floor to you, your reaction and your proposals.
I wish to thank all the colleagues for your comments and questions and support. It is a very happy moment to see that indeed this is not just a Greek special case problem, but it is a European problem. It is not simply about having the national space, but it is about creating those conditions for collective engagement and collective resolutions about those issues, those social and economic issues that still confront us. I'd like to address as quickly as I can a few items. There was a question at the beginning as to how we managed to reduce unemployment, especially in an environment where in 2015 and 2016 there was very little growth. And I take this opportunity to say that, first of all, we have begun our efforts to reform the active labor market delivery system in Greece with great support, not only financial support, but actual cooperation with DG Employment. We are truly happy and grateful that we have been able to discuss the severe problems that we found when we took the government, when the government was elected. And there are many changes that we have implemented. We are nowhere near having completed them, but we are on our way. We have rationalized our spending of the European Social Fund to an extreme and fantastic degree. There is no euro that is being spent that does not deliver positive results. I mentioned earlier that in terms of the training and skill enhancement programs, in such a difficult environment, we identified those few thousands of jobs where there was demand in the labor market, but the skills were not there. Very few, but we identified them. All 17,000 of them, we trained those that were most likely to find the jobs, and they found the jobs. So that is one. The second issue here is the mix of policies. Yes, we still have a regime of restrained spending on the public front, where we have to reach and meet targets that we wish we did not have to, we were not obligated to, but nonetheless, the mixture of policies that we have implemented, it is the mixture of policies, has allowed the stabilization of the economy, and now we are on our way to growth. There are very many positive results. Just because it was mentioned that the means by which we increased employment is by changing, by shifting full-time jobs into part-time jobs and rotational work, I would like to say that this has been argued by many parties of the opposition in Greece, and the mass media have also engaged in this propagandistic narrative. It is not the case. Between 2013 and 2014, there was an increase of part-time and rotational jobs in proportion to full-time jobs from 13 to 14 by 10.5%. Today, have we reversed this completely? Absolutely not. Have we put a brake on it? Absolutely yes. In 2015, that rate of increase was 2.6%. Today, it is 0.16. It is less than 0.5%. And this did not happen by itself. So it is not the case that in Greece employment increased because we have more flexibility, and we have introduced in the last 2.5 years policies that have facilitated the creation of part-time and rotational work. But the real solution will come with growth. Why is it that we do not have as many part-time jobs as we did from 2013 to 2014? Because we have growth rates that tell companies that the personnel that they hire will be needed not only today, but tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. That's how they will switch from part-time and rotational work, the companies, to full-time employment. Next, I would like to welcome very much all your recommendations about next steps. We are here to meet with coordinators of other committees, with coordinators of political parties. We are here to support, and I speak on my own behalf, but not only. It is a European problem. We are here to continue and participate and facilitate as best as you think we could participate in these processes. How did we get to reducing unemployment? There was a question from the colleague from Germany, and the diagnostic mechanism and so on and so forth. Again, it is through the cooperation between the government, between the Ministry of the Employment and the private sector, social partners, because from the very beginning we understood that it will be in collaboration with the private sector that we can create the jobs. We rationalized the system. We were pushed as a country, actually, to put in place the diagnostic mechanism of labor market needs. It is being developed and it is yielding results already. So There are reforms, but not the kind of reforms that flexibilize the markets. There are reforms that can improve the allocation of funds, and in cooperation with the private sector, we can create the maximum possible number of jobs in the private sector. But at the same time, we took an initiative of Public Works Plus, what we call the public works. It is very much in line with what my dear colleague from Luxembourg was mentioning. What do we mean by job creation? We mean the matching of local needs that are not being met, repairs of schools, opening up libraries that have been closed for many years, allowing accessibility to people with disabilities to parks and central government services and offices. And how do we do that? Community by community. We have created a platform where the specific work to be undertaken is reported by municipalities. The number of people that will be hired and the job that they will deliver. We monitor this, we evaluate this, we create temporary jobs at the municipal level for people that are close to impossible to find a job at the time, and therefore this temporary job creation yields good results for the long-term, older-aged unemployed, but also for the local communities. That's why the people at the local community embrace such initiatives. On the real unemployment figures that the Italian colleague mentioned, and where I agree, Ms. Kuneva also mentioned a similar issue, it is absolutely a problem. In Greece, for example, if we were to include those that have part-time employment but wish to have full-time employment, the rotational workers, and those that have been discouraged, we would not be at 21.7, we would be at 31%. And in Europe, we would not be at 9.5%, we would be at 18.5%. This is absolutely true, and what it highlights is the need to pursue the agenda in the directions that we have all been discussing today. There is hidden unemployment. If we were to go back to the days where the unemployment official rate in Greece was 27.5, clearly the hidden unemployment would have brought that figure to a much higher percentage. As for the 8 billion, indeed, it will not go to social programs, but let me tell you that under extraordinarily difficult circumstances as the ones Greece faces, it was the commitment of this government to increase social spending, and we have done so both in education and in health, with very limited resources that we have. We are not where we wish to be, but we are engaging in improving budgetarily the allocations to these social interventions to really begin healing, we are not there yet, the social carnage, as you rightfully said, that has taken place in our country. In terms now of the very positive statements that you have made, again, I want to thank you very much, and for the ECOFIN and for the the participation and the collaboration with those that are truly holding keys and the purse. We need to figure out ways of influencing, of proposing, and I am grateful for all the suggestions that Ms. Rodriguez has made and the rest of the colleagues, and we look forward to the next time we will gather together to concretize and plan and strategize our next moves. Thank you very much.